is a shaft. Where is it? Here. This shaft couples to the shaft here and continues the action to the shutter. It telescopes on that shaft so that effectively it allows that to fold up, because otherwise there'd be nowhere for it to go unless it telescoped away. So there's the guide bush. Get this on there, get that coupled with the shaft behind it. That's it, that's in place. Now the shroud that covers that gear goes here. There are two chrome screws, one at the top which is easy to get to, and the other's not so easy to get to. It's down here. Now it's not uncommon for those screws to be a bit battered and ugly from people having poked at them with a bad screwdriver. They're only chrome and brass, they're easily damaged. Make sure the pretty one's in this position and the ugly one's in this position, because the ugly one can't be seen when the camera's assembled, or the one in that position can't be seen in that position. Okay, so there's our focus helical, all back together, all working smoothly. Front struts are all good. And the front door can go on. See if I've got the bits here for that. Looks like it. Yes, full set. Right, so normally what I do is apply a little bit of synthetic grease to the pins, top and bottom. And the arms on here, where those pins are, I've already given them a little squeeze in to make them nice and snug. So put some synthetic grease there. Find my paper washers, put them in place, and the grease helps hold them in place so they don't go anywhere. And swing this into place. Normally I'll hook it into the groove at the top and stretch it out and hook the pin into the groove at the bottom, like that. And why is that not sitting where I want it to be? I've got it on upside down. God, I don't know. We need it. I had my camera upside down, that's why that went wrong. That's okay, that's where it should be. I'll put my washer in, my spacer washer. Is that in the top or the bottom on this camera? Let's see if I can tell. Looks like it's at the top. Okay, that's easy. Whoops, where's my washer? I've dropped it, now I've got to find it again. There it is. Just pull that into position with the point of my tweezers, line it up with a screw hole and fit one of the screws, the hinge pin screws. Yep, it's running in. Line up the hole, the bottom pin, get that screw started, run it in, Here's the door. Check that it opens and closes. Yeah, it's a bit snug. We'll give things a bit of a wiggle once I've put some grease in there. Lubricate the front slots. Top and bottom. Try the door again and work it a few more times. Doesn't exactly pop open, I'll give that a bit of a wiggle. That's a bit better. What I did basically there was stress it up and down to take some of the load off those arms, the pinch, reduce some of that pinch. It's still there's no rattle there, it's good. But it just means that there's less friction there at that point. These never really did pop right open, they just released. When you press the button on the base, it should pop open enough to get your thumb to. And that's all they ever do. That's a good example, that's working well. You can see how much that pops. If they all did that, the world would be a happier place. Right, so our focus helical's all nice and smooth now. Our door works smoothly. There's no rattle in it. Front standard's good. No play here at all. And basically we've dealt with the front of the camera, all of that stuff. I'm going to turn my attention to the film advance next. Okay, time to start with these film advance components, I think. So, where to start? Let's start here. Here's our take-up spool. I'll put the bush in there. It goes in the plain side, not the side with the slot in it. Open the back of the camera, drop that in there. Here is the film advance shaft, and I'm just going to lubricate this with some graphite grease this time. It appears to work well for me, so we'll use that. So I'll apply some around the top here of the shaft. I'll pull back that spring, get some on that shaft there. Hold up that bush, get some on the shaft below it. And just work that backwards and forwards. Make sure I've got a good covering of grease there. That's ideal. I'll apply some to the spring so that the spring winds up smoothly. That feels good. Drop that into place. Now by convention the slot in this bracket goes to the end of the camera. I'm not sure it makes an awful lot of difference. In practice on these cameras, making sure that was seated. There's 3 small screws hold the bracket to the base plate. Get those screw holes lined up. Get that screw run in. Just rotate the shaft so I can see that hole. And run over there. All 3 in position, I can tighten them up. That's that. Put that aside. Yeah. The latch, the catch for the rewind button. Just want to run some molybdenum paste around the tip of that where it contacts that lever. So it's a bit of a high friction area. That drops in there. Here's its return spring. And there's a shoulder screw that the lever and the spring must be free to revolve around. and make sure that centers up on there, that everything is moving freely, and tighten that up. I need to get this tab of the spring over that side of the lever, so I'll just do that, lift that with my tweezers, drop it into position. That's good. And you can see that as this film advance comes round, it hits that lever, and that in turn unlocks the rewind button, and that can go in next. So let's just open the back of the camera again. Here's the shaft for the sprocket shaft. I want to apply a bit of synthetic grease towards the end of it, up towards the top. That's where it runs through the body housing, and normally I put a smear on that grease on that gear for good measure. The sprocket goes in, the slot is towards the top of the camera. Drop that shaft in, it should slide into the sprocket, through the sprocket, all the way to the base of the camera, and we pull back this lever, it should be able to pop back up into place. It pops into place. That's good. I'm just going to close the front of this camera so they'll sit flat on the bench. Now we're going to find the hole for the screw, and there it is there. And the screw here is what drives the sprocket from the sprocket shaft. So I'll run that screw in, do it up. That one went surprisingly easily. Always a bit suspicious when things go very easily. We'll put the rewind button in place. So I'll start with the spring, put a wipe of synthetic grease through there, find my rewind button, run that through the spring, take the washer, and that goes on the end of the sprocket shaft. Check that you can press the button in, that it's not trapped against that lever. That's better. It clicks in and releases. That's good. I'll do up that, oh dear, that's a shame. I'll just do up the screw on the sprocket shaft. The button clicks into place, and as the film advance lever is moved, it would release. So that's good. And that falling noise before was just the container of cotton buds or Q-tips hitting the floor, scattering everywhere. Don't have to pick them all up. Not just at the moment. Right, 3 screws hold our tripod socket to the base of the camera. Run those screws up lightly until they're all in place. You can usually tell which screws belong here because they've usually got the remains of the adhesives on them. And then you can keep the cleanest pretty ones for the top of the camera. Right, there's our 3 screws in place. I'll just tighten those up. The surround for the rewind button goes on here, and there were 2 brass screws that held that in place. On the earliest cameras, they had a countersunk head screw in that position, and they stopped doing it, and I can only presume it was because when people tightened them right up that it distorted the thin aluminium here. Okay, so that's good, and really I want to glue that lever back down on the base now, because I don't need it flapping in the air anymore. Now I'm going to peel that leather right back a bit, because I would rather have it peeled back right to the boss so that the peel line doesn't show. As I mentioned earlier, when you glue stuff back, it tends to leave a mark where that gluing back happened, or where the leather was pulled back to. So I'll apply some adhesive, and I'll start there and get that spread. I'm particularly interested in making sure that it's tucked in around the edges here where I've just peeled that back to, and making sure I get cover right to the edge. Now this leather is soaking up that adhesive to a large extent. Spread that evenly. And at this end, of course there's less leather. I don't want this on the face if I can help it, but I've got to get the stuff spread evenly. That should do. And now I can roll this down into place. Make sure it fits neatly around the boss on the surround for the rewind button, and press all this firmly down, making sure that it's tucked down into the recess there. The leather's a little bit stretched from the removal process, so it might want to spread out if you let it. Don't let it. Of course we had two Zeiss bumps here and here where those brass screws are. They're no longer evident because the green muck is gone. Check that it's seated correctly around the release button at the front here. Everything's looking tidy there. Okay, so the tripod socket surround can go on. That was held on with two small screws. They're quite short. They're shorter than similar screws on the Retina IIIc type cameras. And if you use the screws from a Retina IIIc type camera in that position, the screw will foul the mechanism in here and you won't like the result. So be aware of that if you're pillaging other cameras for parts. Some things that look similar are not the same. Alright, so just check that's all working. That the release button here is not sticking to the leather. It all appears good. So the front of the camera opens and closes. Our leather's back on the base of the camera. Everything's done there. We're done with the bottom of the camera. We're done with the front. Carry on with the rest of the film advance. Well, the first thing to do with this film advance is to put the clutch together. So I'm just using graphite grease here because I like the feel of the graphite grease in this application. So I've got to get this all together. I've got to compress this spring and get all these three components together, the two components and the spring. So I'm using a pair of crimp lug pliers to hold that. If I rotate that now, I've got it held down. That'll pull that spring into line, and I should be able to feed the outer part over the top like that, and check the action of that clutch, and it moves smoothly. They move much more smoothly in one direction, and fortunately for us that's the correct direction, so that's all good. Right, so that's the clutch. I'll put a bit of synthetic grease through the centre of that, put it onto the shaft. That's good. Now, here we've got the bush, top bush for the film advance. I'll squeeze a bit of grease in here at these two little sets of pinions. Because this has been through the ultrasonic cleaner, it's a bit lacking in any grease at all at the moment. Just want to force a bit of lubricant in there. Run some round the centre, bring the camera back over here, drop this into place. Now, if I roll the sprocket and roll the take-up spool, it engages those two gears and that's all pulled into line. We've got 3 screws hold this to the top of the camera. I'll just do those up lightly. Open the back of the camera again, check that those 2 sets of gears are connected correctly, and tighten those 3 screws up. Okay, let's carry on. This gear here, I'm just putting some synthetic grease around the centre of that. It revolves around there. That actually couples those 2 sets of gears together. You see, if I move the sprocket now, it's also moving the gear over here, which is connected to the take-up spool. Right, so let's position that to the front. There's a drive dog there. I'm just gave that a very slight wipe of synthetic grease. Put its spring on the top. That's conical. The small end of the cone faces upwards. I'll put the ratchet in place. There's a little ratchet which stops things backing up there. That's the standoff there. Here's the ratchet. And the post that revolves round with the spring is here. It's a bit tricky getting this post through the ratchet, through the standoff, and correctly lined up with the screw hole on the top of the camera all at the same time. Yeah, that was done. Swing that spring over, make sure it's engaged in the notch here. And that little pawl is now sprung loaded. Next piece of the puzzle. We've got this piece. This has got the ratchet pawls for the film advance itself, which ensure that the film advance lever can only move in the forward direction until it reaches the end of it, the advance stroke, and then it can only move in the reverse direction once it's reached the end of its stroke. So that's just put a bit of grease on there. I know from experience that there is probably the right place to start in order to give me the correct spring tension for the film advance, and put that in place. And now I can fit a few more components on the top. Okay, carrying on. The ratchet pawl, it controls the motion of the film advance, goes in there. So first I'll put a wipe of molybdenum paste down there, then I'll drop its return spring in place. And here's the piece in question. Now the bracket that holds all this lot in place now needs to go on. It's got a gear on it. So I just force a bit of grease into that gear. It sits on the top. It's tuies outside in the garden making that noise. That's 2 of the 3 screws in. I bet you didn't see any of that. Never mind. Screw here for that ratchet thing. Where's the shoulder screw that runs through it? It's here. Make sure the spring's not trapped underneath it, and it is. That spring should move round the shoulder of the screw, but for one reason or another it doesn't want to do so. Oh, that's okay. That's good. Tighten that screw up. No, it's not good. Why is that not moving? That's okay now. For one reason or another, the tail of that screw, that spring was trapping underneath the screw. Right, let's lift that spring over. That looks good. Right, so the film advance, what more needs to go on there? Was the gear needs to go on the top. The spacer goes on the top of that. Not doing well today at staying in the picture, unfortunately. Right, the start position for this will be around about there, I'd say. Press that down, swing that, yeah, that feels good. Let me put the shutter cocking rack in place next. The shutter cocking rack on the Retina IIa cameras is very robust. I can't remember when I've had to replace one because it was stripped. Potentially you could do it, but generally other things are going to break before you could get to that stage. Right, that's all in place. So if we swing the film advance, see the cocking rack moves. As it gets to the end of the stroke, that pops up, allows the advanced lever to return to the rest position. And the rest position would be there, where you could press the shutter release, which would shift that. Fire the shutter, of course, and it would allow you to wind on for the next shot. That part looks good. The shutter, oh, let's put the rewind in place. The inner part of the rewind shaft, we just put a bit of synthetic grease on that. That has to be able to slide up inside this piece. Got a little tab on the toe of it so that it can only fit in there one way. It's keyed to it. Here is the bush from the top. Now this, you can see that that's lost a lot of chrome. It means there's been a fair degree of friction at that point, which may mean that there was a bit of sand or something else abrasive in there, or it may mean that there was a problem with the bush. Now that's turning smoothly, there's no problem there. I've got that on there upside down. Let's just remove this and put it on the right way up. Yeah, that moves freely. It can go on the camera, and there are 3 fixing screws for that. The same size as was used to hold the bush on the top of the film advance, the same size that held the tripod socket to the base of the camera. Get all 3 in place and then tighten it up. shutter release next, I suppose. Okay, so here's our shutter release. I'll just make sure there's no moisture in that. These have all been through the ultrasonic cleaner and they've been dried with a hairdryer, but that doesn't always get the moisture out of every nook and cranny. Just put a touch of grease there to hold this spacer in place, just so it's not falling out and causing me grief. Got enough loose parts here to worry about. Let's bring the camera back into the picture and zoom out a bit. That's a bit better. Right, that spring goes over that shaft. This slides down into the body here. Let's give that a wipe with molybdenum paste down those two holes. Yeah, that spring's already falling off. Can't have been holding it tight enough. Pop that in there. That should fit over the shaft. It does. And that's the shutter release in place. The shutter release button sits on the top. It's got a little collar that sits on the top of it. That space is absolutely essential. If that's not present, bad things happen. Now the film release button goes here. Don't need to put that in place at the moment. That's quite happy as it is. The shutter, the film advance, I want to assemble this and test it before I do anything else, because we know it had a broken frame counter spring or pawl, but I'll need to make sure that everything else works on here correctly. This little tab here, this sprung loaded tab, is what locks the camera at the end of the film. When it reaches frame number 1, this is allowed to fall into place and locks over a pin on the top of the camera top cover. Just checking that's all moving smoothly. This rubber pad here is pretty much perished, so I'm going to remove that and replace it. That adhesive is a bit nasty. It's I don't know what it was. Doesn't dissolve very well anyway. Let's see if we can get that clean. Right, that's good. Now I need a rubber pad to replace that one.